Weeks passed, and the world began the long process of healing. The scars of the alien invasion were everywhere: crumbled buildings, burned-out streets, and fields of debris that stretched as far as the eye could see. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was a quiet determination in the air. People worked tirelessly to rebuild their homes, their cities, and their lives. It wasn't easy, but they had something to fight for now: a future. Colonel Rachel Bennett walked through the ruins of Brooklyn, her boots crunching over broken concrete. She stopped at a newly erected memorial, its surface etched with the names of those who had fallen during the battle. The words at the base of the stone caught her attention. Asterisk, even in the darkest hour, humanity endures. Asterisk. She traced the letters with her fingers, her throat tightening. They had endured. Against all odds, they had stood their ground and fought back. But the cost had been high, and she knew the memory of those lost would stay with her forever. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes stood nearby, watching as volunteers hauled supplies and cleared rubble. His injuries had healed, though faint scars remained as reminders of the battle. He glanced at Emily Dawson, who was helping a group of civilians sort through donated food and water. Her sniper rifle was slung over her shoulder, a symbol of readiness rather than aggression. Even in peace, she remained vigilant, as did many others. None of them wanted to be caught off guard if the aliens returned. Private Alex Morgan had grown quieter since the battle, but he still pitched in wherever he could. Today, he was painting a mural on the side of a damaged building. The image showed a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide against a bright blue sky. When Daniel asked him about it, Alex simply shrugged. "It's a reminder," he said softly, "that we can rise again, no matter what happens." The stories of heroism spread quickly, becoming legends told around campfires and dinner tables. People spoke of Lieutenant Hayes and his team infiltrating the alien mothership, of Corporal Dawson's precision shots that turned the tide of battle, and of Colonel Bennett's unwavering leadership. But they also remembered the sacrifices, the soldiers who had given their lives to protect others, the families torn apart by the invasion, and the countless acts of courage that went unnoticed. Far away, aboard his flagship, General Vorak stared out at the stars, his thoughts heavy with doubt. He replayed the battle in his mind, analyzing every mistake, every miscalculation. The humans had been weaker, slower, and less advanced in every way. But they had won. Their strength hadn't come from weapons or technology. It had come from something deeper, something Vorak couldn't quite understand. "They'll come back," Commander Zixer said cautiously, breaking the silence. "When they're stronger, better prepared." Vorak didn't respond immediately. He thought about the faces of the human soldiers he had seen on the view screen, their determination, their refusal to give up. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and troubled. "Perhaps. But I wonder, will we truly be ready?" Back on Earth, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. Schools reopened, markets bustled with activity, and children played in the streets once more. But beneath the surface, the world had changed. Humanity carried the lessons of the invasion with them. The knowledge that survival required unity, resilience, and sacrifice. One evening, Daniel visited the memorial again. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the names carved into the stone. He placed a hand on the cool surface and closed his eyes. "We did it," he murmured. "But it's not over." Emily joined him moments later, standing silently beside him. Neither of them needed to speak. They both knew the truth: the aliens might return. And when they did, humanity would face them again. But until then, they would rebuild, prepare, and endure. As the last rays of sunlight faded, a single star appeared in the darkening sky. It was small, distant, and faint, but it shone brightly against the void. A reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope could still light the way. And so, humanity pressed forward, carrying the legacy of those who had fought and died to ensure that the future remained theirs to claim. The retreat of the alien forces brought an uneasy silence to the battlefield. The streets of Brooklyn, once alive with the sounds of explosions and gunfire, now felt eerily quiet. The humans stood amidst the wreckage, their weapons still raised, ready for another attack that never came. Slowly, they lowered their rifles and looked at one another, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. They had won, or at least, they had survived. Colonel Rachel Bennett stepped forward, her boots crunching over broken glass and debris. Her voice, though steady, carried a heaviness that everyone could feel. "It's over," she said, her eyes scanning the tired faces around her. "For now." Lieutenant Daniel Hayes let out a long breath, his body sagging as the adrenaline began to fade. He glanced at Corporal Emily Dawson, who was sitting on a piece of rubble, her sniper rifle resting across her lap. Her hands were trembling slightly, though whether from exhaustion or emotion, he couldn't tell. Private Alex Morgan sat beside her, his head bowed, tears streaming down his face. No one said anything. They didn't need to. The weight of what they had endured hung in the air like a storm cloud. Sergeant Jake Coleman walked over to check on his squad. Most of them were injured, some more seriously than others, but they were alive. That was something. "Good work," he said gruffly, patting one of his soldiers on the shoulder. The young man managed a weak smile before collapsing onto the ground, too tired to stay upright any longer. High above, General Vorak watched his forces withdraw, his pride wounded but not broken. He stared at the view screen, his glowing eyes fixed on the image of the battered human defenders below. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. "How could they have done this?" Commander Zixar approached cautiously. "Sir, we've lost significant numbers. Our fleet is damaged, and morale is low. Perhaps it's time to reconsider our strategy." Vorak turned sharply, his claws clicking against the floor. "Reconsider? You think I don't know that? These humans, they're not just fighting us. They're defying everything we stand for." Zixar hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe that's why we failed. We underestimated their spirit, their will to survive." Vorak growled, pacing the bridge. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down, he knew Zixar was right. The humans had something his soldiers didn't, a reason to fight, a reason to endure. It wasn't strength or technology that had kept them standing. It was something far more dangerous, something Vorak couldn't quantify or control. Back on the ground, the survivors began to gather. Colonel Bennett called for a head count, her voice cracking slightly when she realized how many were missing. Names were read aloud, names of friends, comrades, brothers, and sisters in arms. Each name was followed by a moment of silence, a tribute to those who had given everything. Daniel stood near the edge of the group, staring at the burning remains of the alien mothership. Its frame leaned precariously, smoke still rising into the night sky. He thought about all they had sacrificed to get here, the lives lost, the homes destroyed, the scars that would never fully heal. And yet, despite it all, they had prevailed. Emily joined him after a while, her expression somber. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Daniel hesitated before answering. "Probably. But if they do, we'll be ready." Emily nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "I just hope we can rebuild before then." As dawn broke over the city, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke and ash. It was a small sign of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could still find its way through. The survivors began to clean up what they could, tending to the wounded and searching for supplies. There was no time to rest, not yet. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they had taken the first step. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder as emergency vehicles approached. Reinforcements and medical teams arrived, bringing aid to those who needed it most. The soldiers watched silently as doctors and volunteers worked tirelessly, their efforts a testament to humanity's resilience. As the day wore on, Daniel visited a makeshift memorial set up near the ruins of a park. Names were carved into pieces of metal and stone, each one representing a life lost. He knelt beside it, his fingers brushing against the rough surface. "We did it," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. "But at what cost?" Behind him, Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll honor them," she said softly. "By rebuilding. By surviving." Daniel nodded, standing slowly. The battle may have ended, but the war for Earth's future was far from over. For now, though, they had earned a moment of peace, a moment to breathe, to grieve, and to hope. The momentum shifted in favor of the humans, but the cost was high. The streets of Brooklyn were a wasteland, littered with the bodies of both humans and aliens. Fires burned unchecked, casting an orange glow over the ruins. Colonel Rachel Bennett led the charge, her voice hoarse from shouting orders, but still strong enough to inspire those around her. "Don't let up," she yelled, firing her rifle at a retreating group of alien shock troopers. "They're breaking." Lieutenant Daniel Hayes fought alongside her, his movements fueled by adrenaline and sheer willpower. His uniform was torn and bloodied, but he didn't stop to check his wounds. There was no time for that. Every second counted. Corporal Emily Dawson stayed close, her sniper rifle finding targets even in the chaos. Each shot brought them closer to victory, or so they hoped. Private Alex Morgan had found new courage in the heat of the battle. He darted between cover, tossing grenades with surprising accuracy. When one of the alien drones targeted him, Emily fired a quick shot, disabling it before it could strike. "Thanks," Alex said breathlessly, ducking behind a pile of rubble. Emily nodded, reloading her rifle without missing a beat. Sergeant Jake Coleman's squad held the left flank, their traps and ambushes keeping the aliens off balance. "We've got this," Coleman shouted as his team set off another explosion, sending alien forces scrambling. But even as they pushed forward, the toll of the battle became clear. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Others clutched wounds they couldn't afford to treat properly. Yet, no one gave up. Not yet. High above, General Vorak watched the scene unfold with mounting disbelief. The humans weren't just holding their ground. They were driving his forces back. Reports poured in from the battlefield, each one worse than the last. Entire units had been wiped out. Key commanders were dead or incapacitated. The once unstoppable alien army was faltering, and Vorak couldn't understand why. "How is this possible?" he muttered, pacing the bridge of his flagship, his claws clenched tightly, leaving deep marks on the metal railing. They should have broken by now. Commander Zixer stood nearby, his expression grim. "Sir, our troops are demoralized. The humans, they fight as if they have nothing to lose." Vorak snarled, turning on his second-in-command. "Nothing to lose. Of course they have something to lose. Their lives, their planet. Yet they keep coming at us like mindless beasts." Zixer hesitated before speaking again. "Perhaps that is exactly why they fight so hard. They believe in something greater than themselves." Vorak's eyes narrowed. He didn't want to hear such talk. Belief, determination. These were concepts he struggled to comprehend. To him, war was about strength, numbers, and strategy. Emotion had no place in it. And yet, here were the humans, defying every rule he thought he knew. Back on the ground, the humans pressed their advantage. A young soldier named Sarah Blake made a daring move that turned the tide in one section of the battlefield. Outnumbered and surrounded, she used her pistol to take down 3 alien soldiers in quick succession. Her bravery inspired others to join her, creating a surge that pushed the enemy back further. Colonel Bennett saw the opening and seized it. "Now's our chance," she shouted. "Push them all the way back to the river." The defenders rallied, their voices rising in defiance. They advanced together, their weapons firing in unison. The aliens, already disorganized, began to retreat in earnest. Some tried to hold their ground, but the humans overwhelmed them with sheer numbers and relentless determination. Emily spotted an alien commander attempting to rally his troops. She steadied her rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot struck true, causing panic among the remaining aliens. "That's for everyone you hurt," she whispered under her breath. Daniel noticed the shift in the enemy's morale. "They're falling apart." He called out to his team, "Keep pushing." As the aliens fled, Vorik clenched his fists in frustration. He wanted to send reinforcements, to crush the humans once and for all. But he knew it was too late. The damage had been done. "Order a full retreat," he growled, his voice heavy with defeat. "We'll regroup and return another day." Zixer relayed the command, though he doubted they would ever succeed against such a determined foe. As the alien forces withdrew, the humans cheered, their voices echoing through the ruined streets. But amidst the celebration, Daniel looked around at the devastation. Victory felt hollow when surrounded by so much loss. Still, he allowed himself a small smile. Against all odds, humanity had endured. For now, that was enough. The aliens launched their final assault with a fury that shook the ground. Their forces descended upon Brooklyn, where the last remnants of the human resistance had gathered. The streets were already littered with debris and the wreckage of earlier battles, but now they became a killing field once again. Plasma fire rained down from above, lighting up the night sky in bursts of green and blue. Colonel Rachel Bennett stood at the center of the chaos, her voice cutting through the noise as she rallied her troops. "This is it," she shouted, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "They're throwing everything they've got at us. If we hold this position, we win. If we falter, we lose everything." Her words ignited a spark in the weary soldiers around her. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes scanning the battlefield. Corporal Emily Dawson took her place behind a makeshift barricade, her sniper rifle aimed steadily at the advancing enemy. Private Alex Morgan crouched beside her, clutching the grenade in one hand and a pistol in the other. He was scared, terrified, even, but he refused to let fear paralyze him. The aliens came in waves, their glowing weapons cutting through the air like deadly streaks of lightning. Towering armored units led the charge, followed by swarms of drones and smaller shock troopers. They moved with precision, their movements almost mechanical, but the humans fought back with raw determination. Every shot fired, every explosion triggered, was fueled by desperation and hope. Sergeant Jake Coleman led a squad tasked with holding the left flank. Using explosives scavenged from abandoned vehicles, they created traps along the narrow streets. When a group of alien drones flew too close, Coleman detonated the charges, sending shards of metal flying in every direction. The aliens faltered, giving the humans precious moments to regroup and reload. Back at the main barricade, Emily picked off enemies with deadly accuracy. Her rifle cracked loudly with each shot, and each bullet found its mark. "Got another one," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Beside her, Alex tossed a grenade toward a cluster of approaching aliens, the explosion knocking several of them off their feet. Daniel moved between positions, checking on his team and offering encouragement. "Hold the line," he yelled, firing short bursts to keep the aliens at bay. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help anyone here. As the battle raged on, reinforcements finally arrived. Other squads who had fought their way through the city to join the fight. Their arrival gave the defenders a much-needed boost, both in numbers and morale. Together, they formed a united front, pushing back against the relentless alien assault. High above, General Vorak watched the scene unfold on the viewscreen of his flagship. His frustration boiled over into outright rage. "How are they still standing?" he roared, slamming his fist against the console. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Yet they continued to resist. It defied logic. It defied everything he believed about warfare. Commander Zixer stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, Our losses are unsustainable. Perhaps it's time to consider. No, Vorik snapped, cutting him off. We do not retreat. Not from these primitives. But doubt gnawed at him. For the first time in his long career, Vorik questioned whether victory was truly possible. The humans weren't just fighting. They were enduring. Against all odds, they kept standing. And that unnerved him more than anything else. Back on the ground, the tide began to turn ever so slightly. The aliens' advance slowed as their numbers dwindled. Human fighters surged forward, taking advantage of the momentary weakness. Emily spotted an opportunity and took aim at a group of alien commanders directing the attack. Her shot struck true, causing confusion among the enemy ranks. Colonel Bennett seized the moment. Now's our chance. Push them back. With a fierce cry, the humans charged forward, their weapons blazing. The aliens, caught off guard, fell back in disarray. For the first time in days, hope flickered brightly in the hearts of the defenders. We're doing it, Alex whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. We're actually doing it. Emily nodded, a faint smile breaking through her grim expression. Keep going, she said firmly. Don't stop now. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the humans dared to believe they might actually win. The alien mothership groaned and shuddered, its once mighty frame now a broken shadow of itself. Flames licked at its exposed core, and thick black smoke poured into the night sky. The humans had struck a devastating blow, but the battle was far from over. General Vorik paced the bridge of his flagship, his claws clenching and unclenching as he tried to process the situation. His mind raced with anger and frustration, emotions that burned hotter than the fires consuming his ship below. This cannot be happening, Vorik growled, his voice low and dangerous. How could these insects cause such destruction? Commander Zixer stood nearby, his posture stiff as he delivered another report. Sir, we've lost nearly 40% of our forces on the ground. The humans are regrouping and counterattacking in waves. Our troops are struggling to hold their positions. Vorik stopped pacing and turned to face his second-in-command, his glowing eyes narrowing. Struggling. We outnumber them 10-1. They should already be wiped out. Zixer hesitated before responding. Their tactics are unpredictable. They use the terrain to their advantage, striking quickly and retreating before we can respond. And now, with the mothership damage, morale among our troops is falling. Vorik's jaw tightened. He didn't want to hear excuses. All he wanted was victory, a swift and absolute end to this stubborn resistance. But as much as he hated to admit it, the humans were proving to be more than just a nuisance. They were relentless, adaptable, and willing to fight even when all hope seemed lost. It was infuriating and unsettling. They're still just animals, Vorik muttered, almost to himself. Animals cornered in a trap. They'll break eventually. But deep down, doubt crept into his thoughts. No species he had encountered before had ever shown such resilience. Most civilizations crumbled under the sheer weight of his army's might. Yet here were the humans, standing tall even after everything they had endured. Their cities were in ruins, their people scattered and scared, but they refused to give up. Back on the ground, Lieutenant Daniel Hayes and his team took refuge in a crumbling office building. The structure was unstable, its walls cracked and its floors littered with debris, but it provided enough cover for the moment. Emily Dawson sat against a wall, reloading her sniper rifle while trying to catch her breath. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind was racing. She knew the explosion had dealt a serious blow to the aliens, but she also knew it wasn't enough to win the war. We hit them hard, Jake Coleman said, breaking the silence. But they're not done yet. You can bet they'll come at us harder next time. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. We've bought ourselves some time, but not much. We need to keep pushing, keep hitting them where it hurts. Alex Morgan, who had been unusually quiet since the explosion, finally spoke up. Do you think we can really win this? I mean, look at what they've got compared to us. Emily glanced at him, her tone firm but reassuring. We don't have a choice, Alex. If we stop fighting, they'll wipe us out. So yeah, we can win. We have to. Her words seemed to steady the young private, though the fear in his eyes didn't completely fade. Daniel appreciated Emily's ability to inspire others, even in the darkest moments. He wished he felt as confident as she sounded. Outside, the sounds of battle continued to echo through the city. Alien drones screeched overhead, searching for survivors, while bursts of plasma fire illuminated the streets below. The humans were still holding their ground, using every trick they had learned so far to stay alive. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and sheer determination kept them one step ahead of their enemies, at least for now. Colonel Rachel Bennett's voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Hayes, report your status. Daniel grabbed the communicator and pressed the button. This is Hayes. We're intact, but running low on ammo. The strike on the mothership was successful, but the aliens are regrouping. Good work, Rachel replied. Hold your position. Reinforcements are en route. Reinforcements. The word brought a flicker of hope to the team, though they knew help would only go so far. The real fight, the one that would decide Earth's fate, was still ahead of them. As the night wore on, the humans prepared for another wave of attacks. They patched up their wounds, shared what little food and water they had left, and fortified their position as best they could. Each soldier knew the odds were stacked against them, but none of them gave up. Not yet. High above, Vorek stared at the burning wreckage of the mothership, his pride wounded but his resolve unbroken. You may have won this round, he muttered darkly, but the war is far from over. The strike team raced back through the sewer tunnels, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageways. The explosives they had planted were set to detonate in minutes, and every second counted. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he urged the others to move faster. Behind him, Corporal Emily Dawson carried the empty backpack, her breathing heavy but controlled. Private Alex Morgan stumbled occasionally, his legs aching from the long journey, but Sergeant Jake Coleman kept a firm hand on his shoulder, guiding him forward. We're almost there, Daniel said, his voice low but steady. He glanced at his watch again. 30 seconds left. They couldn't afford to slow down now. The group reached a ladder leading up to the surface, its rusted metal rungs slick with moisture. Climb, Daniel ordered, motioning for Alex to go first. The young private hesitated for only a moment before grabbing the ladder and pulling himself upward. Emily followed close behind, her movements quick and efficient, despite her exhaustion. Jake went next, leaving Daniel to bring up the rear. As Alex pushed open the manhole cover above, a rush of cool night air greeted them. The sounds of distant battle drifted through the darkness. Explosions, gunfire, and the hum of alien ships overhead. One by one, the team emerged from the sewers, collapsing onto the pavement of an abandoned street. They were just outside the shadow of the massive alien mothership, its towering form looming like a monstrous statue against the skyline. 10 seconds, Daniel muttered, his eyes locked on the ship's base. Everyone turned to look, holding their breath as they waited for the charges to detonate. The countdown ended, and the world seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Then, with a deafening roar, the explosives erupted. Fire and smoke tore through the lower sections of the mothership, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The ground shook violently, knocking the soldiers off their feet. Chunks of metal and debris rained down around them, forcing them to shield their heads with their arms. When the initial blast subsided, the team scrambled to their feet, staring in awe at the damage. Flames licked at the exposed interior of the ship, and thick black smoke billowed into the sky. The once imposing vessel now leaned precariously, its structural integrity compromised. Alarms blared from within, a chaotic symphony of warning signals. High above, General Vorek staggered as the shockwave rocked the flagship's bridge. His claws gripped the railing tightly as he stared at the view screen, which showed the burning wreckage of his precious mothership. Impossible, he growled, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. How could these primitive humans have done this? His forces outnumbered them, outgunned them, yet here they were, inflicting catastrophic damage. Commander Zixer stood nearby, his expression grim. "Sir, we've lost critical systems. Shields are down, and the engines are destabilizing." Vorac's eyes narrowed into slits. "Divert all power to repairs. Send reinforcements to the surface immediately." "It may already be too late," Zixer replied cautiously. "Their defenses are crumbling. If we don't retreat soon, we risk losing everything." "No," Vorac snapped, slamming his fist against the console. "We will not retreat. These humans must be exterminated." Back on the ground, Daniel and his team regrouped near the edge of the blast zone. Emily coughed, waving away the thick smoke that stung her lungs. "Did it work?" Alex asked, his voice shaky but hopeful. Daniel nodded, a faint smile breaking through his grim expression. "It worked. We hit them hard." But their victory was short-lived. The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. A squad of alien shock troopers emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on the humans. The soldiers raised their rifles, ready to fight once more. Just as the aliens prepared to fire, a sudden explosion from the mothership sent a wave of energy surging outward, knocking the troopers off balance. "Move," Daniel shouted, seizing the opportunity. The team sprinted toward the nearest building, using its ruins as cover. Behind them, the remaining aliens regrouped, but the humans had already slipped away into the chaos of the battlefield. As they caught their breath inside the crumbling structure, Emily looked at Daniel. "What do we do now?" Daniel glanced back at the burning mothership, his jaw tightening. "Now, we keep fighting. This isn't over yet." From high above, Vorac watched the scene unfold, his pride wounded but his resolve unbroken. The humans had struck a blow, but he refused to admit defeat. "Not yet. You think you've won," he muttered under his breath, his glowing eyes fixed on the screen. "This is far from over." Alex hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I think so." He stepped forward, setting the backpack down carefully. His hands trembled as he opened the panel covering the alien device, but his focus never wavered. Slowly, he traced the wires inside, looking for the right one to cut. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't stop. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a thin, glowing wire that seemed to pulse with energy. "This is it," Alex muttered under his breath. He pulled out a pair of pliers and snipped the wire. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the green glow faded, plunging the area back into darkness. "Good work," Daniel said quietly, patting Alex on the shoulder. The young private managed a weak smile, though his hands were still shaking. They continued deeper into the tunnels, moving slower now. The farther they went, the more alien tech they encountered. Traps, sensors, even automated drones that patrolled certain areas. Each obstacle forced them to adapt quickly. Emily used her sniper rifle to take out drones from a distance, while Jake used brute force to disable traps. Daniel coordinated their efforts, making sure everyone stayed safe and focused. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the end of the tunnel. A massive metal hatch loomed ahead, sealed tightly and guarded by 2 alien sentries. The creatures stood tall, their armored bodies gleaming under the dim light. Their weapons were pointed outward, ready to fire at the slightest movement. "We can't just walk up to them," Jake whispered, crouching low behind a pile of debris. "They'll spot us before we get close." Emily studied the scene carefully. "There's a blind spot near the left wall," she said. "If we can distract them, someone might be able to slip past unnoticed." Daniel nodded. "I'll create the distraction. Emily, you cover me. Alex, stay here with Jake. Once I draw their attention, Emily will move in and plant the charges." "No way," Emily argued softly. "You're not doing this alone." "It has to be me," Daniel insisted. "You're our best shot. If things go wrong, you'll need to pick them off." Reluctantly, Emily agreed. Daniel took a deep breath, tightened his grip on his rifle, and stepped out into the open. He fired a burst of shots at the ceiling above the sentries, causing chunks of rock to fall. The noise startled the aliens, who turned toward the disturbance, their weapons raised. "Now," Daniel shouted. Emily sprang into action, darting toward the blind spot Emily had identified. Her movements were swift and silent, allowing her to reach the hatch undetected. She placed the first explosive charge carefully, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Meanwhile, Daniel kept the aliens' attention locked on him, firing short bursts to keep them pinned down. Jake and Alex provided covering fire from their position, picking off any reinforcements that tried to approach. When Emily finished planting the charges, she signaled for everyone to fall back. Together, the team retreated into the shadows, leaving the explosives ticking softly behind them. As they disappeared into the tunnels, the countdown began. The aliens wouldn't know what hit them until it was too late. The sewer tunnels were dark, damp, and suffocating. The air smelled of rot and rust, and the sound of dripping water echoed endlessly around them. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes led the strike team through the narrow passageways, his flashlight cutting through the shadows as they moved cautiously forward. Behind him, Corporal Emily Dawson kept her rifle ready, her sharp eyes scanning every corner for signs of danger. Private Alex Morgan followed close behind, clutching the backpack filled with explosives like it was a lifeline. Sergeant Jake Coleman brought up the rear, ensuring no one was left behind. Every step felt heavier than the last. The weight of their mission pressed down on them, but none of them complained. They had volunteered for this, knowing full well the risks involved. Failure wasn't an option, not when the fate of the city, and perhaps the entire planet, rested on their shoulders. "Stay alert," Daniel whispered, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what's waiting for us down here." Emily nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. She spotted something in the distance, a faint green glow illuminating part of the tunnel wall. "Daniel," she murmured, pointing toward it. "That doesn't look natural." Daniel squinted at the light. It pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. He motioned for the team to stop and signaled for Emily to take a closer look. She crept forward silently, her movements careful and deliberate. As she approached, she realized the glow came from alien technology embedded into the wall, a sensor of some kind. "It's a patrol checkpoint," Emily whispered over her shoulder. "They're watching the tunnels." Daniel frowned. If the aliens detected them, the mission would be over before it began. He turned to Alex. "Can you disable it?" The fighting had slowed for a brief moment, giving the human soldiers a chance to catch their breath. In Central Park, what was once a peaceful haven of greenery and calm was now a scared battlefield. Trees lay uprooted, their trunks charred and blackened by alien fire. The air smelled of smoke and ash, and the ground was littered with debris. But amidst the destruction, hope flickered like a small flame in the darkness. Colonel Rachel Bennett stood at the center of the makeshift camp, her face smeared with dirt and sweat. She was a woman who carried the weight of command heavily, but she also knew how to inspire others. Her voice cut through the chaos as she addressed the weary soldiers gathered around her. "We've lost a lot today," she began, her tone steady but firm. "Friends, comrades, people we cared about. But we're still here, and as long as we're still breathing, we fight." Lieutenant Daniel Hayes listened closely, his rifle resting against his shoulder. He glanced at Corporal Emily Dawson, who stood nearby, reloading her sniper rifle. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Still, she nodded along with the colonel's words, her jaw set with determination. Rachel continued, her voice rising slightly. "The aliens think they'd broken us. They think we'll crumble under their weapons and their numbers. But they don't know who we are. We're not just soldiers, we're survivors. and we're going to show them exactly what that means. Her plan was bold, almost reckless. A strike team would infiltrate the alien mothership using the city's sewer system, which ran beneath the streets and connected to the ship's landing site. Once inside, they would plant explosives at key structural points, crippling the vessel and forcing the aliens to retreat. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. But no one hesitated when Rachel asked for volunteers. "I'll lead the team," Daniel said immediately, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but his heart raced. He didn't want to die, but he couldn't stand by while others fought. Emily stepped up beside him without hesitation. "I'm coming too," she said firmly. Her loyalty to Daniel and to the mission was unwavering. Private Alex Morgan raised his hand next, his youthful face pale but resolute. "Count me in," he said, his voice trembling only slightly. Sergeant Jake Coleman joined them moments later, followed by a handful of other soldiers. Together, they formed a small but determined group, ready to risk everything for a chance to turn the tide of the battle. As the strike team prepared to move out, Rachel pulled Daniel aside. "You know this is dangerous," she said quietly, her eyes searching his face. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Daniel nodded. "We won't let you down." High above the earth, General Vorak paced the bridge of his flagship, his frustration mounting. The humans were proving far more resilient than he had anticipated. Reports poured in of their guerrilla tactics, their ambushes, their refusal to surrender. Even now, sensors indicated unusual activity near the sewer systems below. Something was happening, something he didn't fully understand. "Zixar," Vorak barked, turning to his second-in-command. "Send a patrol to investigate the underground tunnels. If the humans are planning something, I want to stop it before it begins." Zixar nodded and relayed the order, but a part of him doubted its effectiveness. The humans had already shown they could think on their feet, adapt to any situation, and fight back harder than expected. Stopping them might not be as simple as sending a patrol. Back on the ground, the strike team descended into the sewers, the stench of decay and dampness filling the air. The darkness was nearly absolute, broken only by the dim glow of their flashlights. Emily took point, her sharp eyes scanning for signs of alien patrols. Behind her, Alex carried a backpack filled with explosives, his hands trembling slightly but his focus unwavering. "This place gives me the creeps," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of dripping water. "Stay focused," Daniel replied, his tone reassuring. "We've got a job to do." As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the weight of their mission settled heavily on their shoulders. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and deep behind enemy lines. But despite the odds, they pressed on. One step at a time, they moved closer to the alien mothership, driven by a shared belief that even in the face of impossible odds, humanity could endure. The battle raged on, and the streets of Manhattan resembled a war zone. Smoke curled into the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning metal and shattered concrete. The alien forces pressed forward relentlessly, their glowing weapons cutting through the haze like deadly flashes of lightning. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the human soldiers refused to back down. They adapted, they improvised, and most importantly, they fought with everything they had. Lieutenant Daniel Hayes moved swiftly from one piece of cover to another, shouting orders to his team. His voice was hoarse from yelling, but he didn't stop. Every second counted. Behind him, Corporal Emily Dawson crouched low, her sniper rifle steady in her hands. She scanned the battlefield, picking off alien drones whenever they strayed too far from their formations. Each shot she fired seemed to echo louder than the last, a reminder that humanity still had a fighting chance. "Daniel," Emily called out, her tone urgent. "They're trying to flank us again." Daniel turned just in time to see a group of alien soldiers slipping through the wreckage of a collapsed building. Their movements were quick, almost insect-like, but not quick enough to escape Emily's keen eyes. Without hesitation, Daniel signaled for Sergeant Jake Coleman and his squad to move in and intercept. Coleman nodded sharply and led his men into position, their boots crunching over broken glass and debris. As the two groups clashed, the sound of gunfire filled the air. The aliens unleashed bursts of plasma, forcing the humans to dive for cover. But the soldiers responded with precision, aiming carefully and conserving their limited ammunition. One by one, the alien attackers fell, their glowing bodies collapsing onto the ruined streets. It was brutal, chaotic, and exhausting, but it worked. High above the battlefield, General Vorak paced the bridge of his flagship, his claws clicking against the metallic floor. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The humans weren't just surviving. They were fighting back, and not in some reckless, suicidal way. They were smart. Every time his forces adjusted their tactics, the humans countered them. It was as if they could think faster, react quicker, endure more. "This is impossible," Vorak muttered, stopping to glare at the view screen. The display showed real-time footage of the battle below, highlighting the humans' movements. One particular squad caught his attention, a group of soldiers using guerrilla tactics to disable an entire battalion of robotic drones. A young soldier, barely out of adolescence, hacked into an alien terminal and reprogrammed the machines to self-destruct. Vorak clenched his fists. How are they doing this? Commander Zixar, who had been silently observing the general's growing frustration, finally spoke up. "Perhaps we underestimated them. Sir, these humans, they may lack our technology, but they have something else." "What?" Vorak snapped, turning to face his second-in-command. "What do they have that we don't?" Zixar hesitated before answering. "Determination, resilience, a will to survive no matter the cost." Vorak growled, dismissing the idea with a wave of his hand. "Sentimental nonsense. Determination won't save them when we crush them completely." But deep down, Vorak wasn't so sure. Back on the ground, the humans continued to surprise him. Another squad, led by Colonel Rachel Bennett, had fortified a position near the remains of a subway station. Using scavenged materials, they constructed crude barricades and booby traps. When a group of alien shock troopers charged toward them, they triggered the traps, sending shards of shrapnel flying in every direction. The aliens faltered, giving the humans enough time to counterattack. Private Alex Morgan, the youngest member of Daniel's team, proved to be unexpectedly resourceful. Armed with little more than a pistol and a few grenades, he darted between cover, distracting the enemy and drawing their fire. His actions gave Daniel and Emily precious moments to regroup and plan their next move. Despite his youth, Morgan showed no fear, his determination unwavering. As the hours dragged on, the tide of the battle began to shift ever so slightly. The aliens were still stronger, still better equipped, but the humans refused to give up. They used every advantage they could find: the terrain, the element of surprise, even their sheer stubbornness, to hold their ground. Watching from above, Vorak felt a flicker of doubt creep into his mind. For the first time, he questioned whether this invasion would truly end in victory. The humans weren't just fighting. They were enduring. Against all logic, against all expectations, they kept standing. And that unnerved him more than anything else. The alien fleet descended upon Earth with a deafening roar, their massive ships blotting out the sun over New York City. The sky turned an eerie shade of green as plasma beams rained down, shattering buildings and setting streets ablaze. Panic erupted among the civilians below, but amidst the chaos, Lieutenant Daniel Hayes stood firm. Clutching his rifle tightly, he barked orders to his platoon, a small group of human soldiers determined to hold their ground. Daniel wasn't a hero by choice. He was just a man doing his duty, like so many others. But today, something inside him felt different. Maybe it was the way the aliens loomed overhead, treating humanity as if they were nothing more than ants under a boot. Or maybe it was the look in Corporal Emily Dawson's eyes when she glanced at him. Calm, focused, unshaken. Whatever it was, Daniel knew one thing for certain. Surrender was not an option. "Stay sharp," Daniel shouted as another wave of alien drones swept across the horizon. Their sleek, insect-like designs glinted in the dim light, their weapons spitting bursts of blue energy. The humans ducked behind what little cover remained. A crumbling wall here, the husk of a car there. Emily crouched beside Daniel, her sniper rifle aimed steadily at the advancing enemy. "I've got eyes on 3 hostiles," she said, her voice steady despite the explosions shaking the ground beneath them. "They're flanking us from the left." "Copy that," Daniel replied. "Coleman, take your squad and cover the rear. We can't let them box us in." Sergeant Jake Coleman nodded and motioned for his team to move. They darted through the wreckage, firing short bursts to keep the aliens at bay. It was risky, but it worked for now. The aliens hesitated, their glowing eyes scanning the ruins for movement. That brief pause gave Daniel and his people a chance to regroup. From high above, General Vorak watched the battle unfold on the view screen of his flagship. His claws tapped impatiently against the command console as he observed the humans' desperate attempts to resist. "Primitive creatures," he muttered to himself, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "How are they still standing?" Commander Zixar, standing nearby, tilted his head. "Perhaps they are more resourceful than we anticipated." "Sir," Vorak snorted. "Resourceful? These humans are outnumbered 10 to 1. Their weapons are inferior. Their technology is laughable. Yet," he trailed off, narrowing his eyes. Despite the odds, the humans weren't retreating. Instead, they adapted. When the aliens advanced in straight lines, the humans split into smaller groups, using the rubble to ambush them. When the aliens deployed drones, the humans used EMP grenades to disable them. Back on the ground, Emily took aim at an alien drone hovering near a collapsed building. Her fingers squeezed the trigger, and the bullet struck true, sending the machine spiraling to the ground. "Got it," she called out, reloading quickly. Nearby, Private Alex Morgan, a wiry young soldier barely out of training, tossed a makeshift explosive toward another group of drones. The blast sent shards of metal flying, forcing the aliens to retreat momentarily. Daniel allowed himself a fleeting smile. "Good work, Morgan," he said, slapping the private on the shoulder. But the moment passed quickly. Another wave of enemies approached, this time led by towering armored units. Plasma fire lit up the battlefield, forcing the humans to scramble for new positions. As the fight dragged on, Vorak found himself growing uneasy. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be weak, easily crushed under the weight of superior forces. Yet here they were, refusing to give up, refusing to die. "These human soldiers," Vorak growled, leaning closer to the screen. "They're unstoppable."